Hi, thank you for having me here today. It was an incredibly informative day, which I'm going to have to think about on the ride home. And thanks for sticking around for this last session. I wanted to finish off the meeting with a few summary words, and in particular make 3 points. So the first is simply kind of a summary of what we've heard, which is that schools are having a harder and harder time hiring teachers, and it's a confluence of several factors. We knew that the demographic trends that were going to come around, that the older teacher workforce would retire, creating the need for many new teachers. And when you have new teachers turn over more than older teachers do. So we knew we would both have the older teachers leaving and a less stable workforce coming in. When you add to that a relatively good economy, and you have a period in the past of few teachers hired, so there wasn't a lot of incentive for people to go into teaching, and less support for higher education. All these things have come together right now to create difficulties of recruiting and retaining teachers in many districts. So that really came home to us in the report that this whole session is based on, as well as in what you've heard from a lot of people today. So that's the first part. This isn't actually new. We faced it before, and it's really all part of a continuum, which is that we're always working to get better teachers and more, get a better supply of teachers into schools. And sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder. And it's a little harder now for all of these reasons, but this isn't something new. It was hard before, it'll be harder again in the future. But it does focus us, because of this difficulty, on really the importance of thinking about how to attract and retain teachers to our schools. My second point, and also one that was driven home today, is that when labor markets get tight and there are fewer applicants for each job, this tightness is going to affect different jobs in different schools differently. So first, we're going to see differences across subject areas, and areas that have high returns outside of education, where people need to have skills like language or science and math. We're going to have a harder time recruiting there, and we're going to have a harder time recruiting in areas that take additional training or are just harder when you're working, like special education. And so because of that, this kind of time of difficulty means that we have to think about strategies to recruit in these specific areas. And some of them, particularly the ones that require skills like language or science or math, we're going to really have to think about higher education, because it takes a while for these skills to happen. It's not like you can train people in a year to have the science and math or language skills that we need. We really need to think earlier on about incentives in those areas. And we've seen that these kinds of incentives can be effective. And Patricia pointed this out earlier, and I think it takes this kind of concerted effort to think about how we're going to train more people and encourage more people with these skills. So that's the first part about this kind of differential effect. But perhaps even more importantly than the subject matter differences, when labor markets get tight, they affect different schools differently. And I actually think it's the most unforgivable characteristic of our school system, that it is more difficult to work in and less appealing for teachers to work in schools where the kids need good teachers the most. And when shortages hit, they're going to hit those schools the strongest. More appealing schools can fill their shortages with teachers from other schools. And the most important policy goals that we can have is to put traditionally difficult to staff schools on an even footing with other schools in their ability to recruit and retain teachers. And I think we can only do that by making them more appealing places to work at, by having more resources, by making sure that we get the best school leaders into those schools and get the best peers then into those schools, because you can create a domino effect in this way, so that if what we can do now is do everything we can to make the teachers that are coming in higher quality and more engaged in those schools, then the next group of teachers who come won't see the differences across schools that we see now. With education policy, we're actually never going to eliminate residential segregation and some of the other kinds of forces that are working to make it more difficult to attract college graduates to some areas than to other areas. But what we can do is actually make it more appealing for them to teach there. So we're not going to change the underlying factors, but we actually can change the results if we hit it in different ways. So those are kind of some of the things that I think we've talked about already. What I wanted in my final point is more optimistic that while the influx of new teachers into our education system is a challenge, it's also this kind of incredible opportunity that we haven't had before. It's actually much easier to influence new teachers than it is to influence more experienced teachers. Just as one example, it's far, far easier to get teachers, new teachers, really good, strong new teachers, into the most difficult to staff schools and to keep them there than it is to try to pull teachers who are successful at other schools into these traditionally difficult to staff schools. And so we have a possibility, and you know, we have this sense, oh, more experienced teachers are much more effective, much better teachers than the new teachers, but that's not necessarily true. In fact, we've done a really good job. We've done a kind of particularly good job in the last 10 years of improving some of our teacher preparation, and some of the teachers coming out of teacher preparation programs are now really just as good as more experienced teachers, and maybe they'll get better over time, but experience explains a very little difference about how effective teachers are, and so that we can do a lot to get good teachers into these low-performing schools. So I think that we have this kind of opportunity here that we haven't had before. And I think, so we're faced with this challenge, we have this great opportunity, and what we have now is we have this knowledge of what it takes to bring in strong and to support strong teachers that we haven't had maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And the first thing that I think we know is the importance of a shared language about what high-quality teaching is. That through the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, through all of these observational protocols that have come up for teacher evaluation, we've really come to think about how we can most clearly articulate what good teaching is, because we needed that for those things. We needed that for the new focus of teacher preparation. And once we've created it, what we've seen, if you've looked at the teacher evaluation, whatever you think of teacher evaluation, if you looked at the ones that are successful, the ones that have been successful are the ones that have provided very clear, easy to operationalize feedback back to teachers about what they can do to improve. And the ones that haven't been successful, all of these incentives for, on value added, which, I use value added in my research, but I think we have pretty strong evidence that just providing someone with value added doesn't tell them very much about what they need to do to get better. But having this shared language really helps with that. It helps with linking pre-service to in-service preparation, and it helps teachers know the next step of what they need to do. And this doesn't mean that we know exactly what good teaching is. We're not saying that this is the only thing that it's good teaching, because maybe once teachers get in there and they get comfortable in what they're doing, they're going to do things that we don't even know about that are really better. We don't have to have the perfect shared language. We just have to have a shared language to help support the teachers as they move in, because right in the beginning you really need those kinds of support. So I think we're in a much better position now because we share a kind of language that we didn't, and I think one of the things we can do is continue to refine that and continue to think in each area what is it that we can do so that we have some agreement on what good teaching is to help new teachers. So I would probably put the shared language of good teaching and knowledge about good teaching as something that we've started to do and should continue to do that's going to likely have the biggest effect on the quality of teachers. But I think there are two other things that we know now that are really important to think about in this time. And one of those is the kind of salience and importance of direct recruitment. While we can do some things and make it more appealing to be in schools and those kinds of things, it's, straight PR is effective in trying to get people into teaching and trying to get undergraduates in many places don't know what to do. We need to give them ideas about why this is a good thing to do, what we can do to get people who are mildly interested in science into science in a way so that they can teach, or into math in that way, or to use the skills that they have. I think we can do a lot with this combination of direct PR and actually incentives early on, because by paying for education, by incentivizing teaching in low-performing schools, these things actually seem to do something to pull people in. I don't think it's going to be, again, the money is something, but it's part of kind of making people's decisions, helping them make decisions in these times of decisions that help us in the long run. So I think we've really learned that sometimes we don't think of the most obvious, which is go out. I go around to a lot of districts and talk about where it's difficult to recruit, but there are many schools that aren't going to job fairs, that aren't going out. Those job fairs actually can be fairly productive places to get teachers. So I do think we've learned that recruitment is important and that we should be kind of strategic about thinking about how to use that. The final thing that I think that's become clearer and clearer is that teachers, of course, don't teach in a vacuum. If we want to recruit and retain teachers, we need to make their jobs doable. They should be working in well-functioning organizations, and these need to be organizations that are run by effective leaders. They need peers that are effective, so that are working well. California, as many of you know, have the fewest adults in the system of almost any state. I think we compete with Utah. In some places this is going to be fine, but in other places we really do need counselors, and we need coaches, and we need other educators, and some of these educators are really quite difficult to recruit. And we may also need, I was talking earlier, we may also need to be able to recruit IT people for district offices so that the information is there and so that systems function in high quality ways, because no matter whom we recruit, if they're not going into jobs where they can be successful, they're not going to stay, and they're actually not going to be successful. So no matter who the individual is, you're not going to get the high quality teaching that you want. We often focus on the difficulty of recruiting to schools serving lower achieving students or students from lower income backgrounds. And I focused on it here, and I do think this inequality is something that's key, but I want to emphasize that if you actually look, there are plenty of schools serving poor kids that have no problem recruiting teachers, and that's because they're high-functioning organizations. And what the shame is that we have let a lot of schools serving lower achieving kids get to be dysfunctional organizations, and it's through this change and the kind of working conditions that the teachers face that I think we have the best opportunity to improve both the quality overall, but most importantly the inequality between schools. So just to conclude, we have an imperative now in that there's this great demand for new teachers, but the imperative is kind of the opportunity that we need to change both the ingrained and systematic differences in working conditions across schools that have led to the clear educational inequality. And I really think it's the opportunity to use our increased knowledge about good teaching and about recruitment and the productive ways of helping teachers improve that we've developed that can improve the quality of across schools. And I really hope that each of us take the responsibility in our own local areas to think about how we can do it, because some of this really does require state policy, it requires funding, it requires a lot of things, but in the current work, the current governance of California, a lot of this is going to be a local issue, and it's going to be through these local strategies, these connections between local preparation programs. I mean, I love some of the stuff that Cal State has been doing, but the connections between the districts and and other programs where this is going to happen. It's going to happen locally, and I hope you all take what we've learned today and push forward on this. I want to thank you all for coming. As I'm one of the co-directors of PACE, I hope you've really enjoyed this, and I hope it's just the start of a conversation.